The Vedas explain many topics, including the soul, metaphysics, gods, and superior beings living in higher planetary systems. Most of these topics can't be proven or disproven by modern science, since they are outside the realm of experimentation. One can make experiments only with things or beings that are lower than himself. One can freely experiment with inanimate matter or even with animals, but one can't experiment with beings that are more powerful than him. A researcher may experiment with rats and rabbits, but he can't make experiments with the President of the United States, for example. Unless he would agree to come and be experimented upon, the researcher would be baffled. Similarly, one can't make experiments with God, or he accepts the conditions set up by him, or he will not get anything. Science is based on experimentation, and therefore is by design not an effective tool for getting knowledge about God, the soul, or higher beings, as well as subtler entities or higher levels of reality that are beyond our sense perception. These are topics that will always remain out of the reach of modern researchers. One may accept or not the Vedas, but the fact is that there is no other source that gives detailed knowledge about these topics. That's an area where the Vedas have a monopoly, we can say. There is, however, a part of Vedic knowledge that overlaps with modern science, cosmology. The Vedas give knowledge about the structure of the universe, as well as important historical events that can be proven or disproven by experimentation. This is quite an interesting point because if it's proved that the cosmological knowledge of the Vedas is correct, this makes a very strong case that everything else in the Vedas is correct, including all the spiritual knowledge. However, if the cosmological knowledge from the Vedas can be disproved by modern science, this makes an equally strong case that everything else in the Vedas may be incorrect, and everything may be actually just a big fantasy. The British in India did a very good job of discrediting the Puranas with their spurious translations and false propaganda, to the extent that even most Indians believe that the Puranas are just myths. As a result, other parts of the Vedas are also not taken seriously, and people are deprived of the spiritual knowledge they contain. Once the Puranas are discredited, people automatically become skeptical about the knowledge from the Bhagavad Gita and other books of spiritual knowledge. The problem with the cosmology of the Puranas is that it offers a description of the world that is different from our sense perception. It's not easy to understand and even harder to harmonize with recent cosmological discoveries. Many read the 50th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam and get under serious doubts. I have been studying the Vedas and especially the books of Srila Prabhupada since 1992, and the enigmatic descriptions of the universe offered in the 50th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam are a topic that always intrigued me. However, over the years, I started to better understand it, helped by the research of Sadaputa Prabhu, Drutakarma Prabhu, and many others. This video is the first part of a new series where I will try to share what I learned about this topic over the years and try to offer simple and inclusive explanations of how to make sense of the cosmological knowledge of the Puranas. As a bonus, we will study how modern science is actually corroborating the knowledge from the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is quite amazing considering that the Puranas were written more than 5,000 years ago. How the sages of ancient times were able to give dates for the creation of the solar system, as well as the creation of the universe itself, also identifying precise dates to extinction events whose dates were discovered only recently by modern researchers, is a question that modern scientists still have to answer. Before we start, be sure to like this video to help YouTube understand that it's something relevant and show it to other people. And, if you haven't done so, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you can be notified when the next parts are out. Part 1. What does the Bhagavatam say? The first step to understanding the model of the universe given the Puranas is to study it. The same explanation is repeated in different Puranas, but to keep the description short, here we will focus on the description of the universe offered in the 50th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. In this part, I will just give a short description of the model, and the rest of the series will be dedicated to explaining it. The Srimad Bhagavatam compares our universe to a coconut. A coconut is composed of several layers, with a hollow space inside that is half filled with water. Because of the coverings, the space inside the coconut is completely dark. A living entity living inside the coconut will never see the light shining outside. The Vedas explain that, vast as it may be, our universe is just one amongst many universes that float in the causal ocean, just like balls floating on water. The entirety of the causal ocean, including all the universes, equals just 1/4 of the total creation. Outside, there is the spiritual realm that represents the other 3/4. Each universe is composed of 7 coverings and a hollow space in the middle. Half of this space is filled with subtle water, over which Garbhodakashai Vishnu lays down on the bed of Sheshanaga, while the other half is empty. This is the space where the universe is created by Lord Brahma, the universal architect. All the distance mentioned in the Srimad Bhagavatam are given in yojanas. There is debate related to exact length of the yojana, but Srila Prabhupada in his commentary adopts the probable length of 8 miles per yojana for the verses of the Srimad Bhagavatam. Other authors accept different measures, substantiating their hypothesis with the help of experimental knowledge. The main structure of the universe is Bhumandala. Situated on the horizontal middle of the empty space, Bhumandala is 500 million yojanas, or 4 billion miles in diameter, which is hardly the size of our solar system. In Srimad Bhagavatam 5.16.1, it's mentioned that, quote, "The radius of Bhumandala extends as far as the sun spreads its light and heat, and as far as the moon and all the stars can be seen," unquote. This verse should not be taken literally, since Srimad Bhagavatam 5.20.37 mentions that the light of the sun extends only up to the Loka mountain, which is positioned in the middle of Bhumandala, and also because different beings may see things in different ways, but it gives us an idea of its size. Bhumandala is formed by a sequence of 7 concentric islands, separated by oceans. It's mentioned that the planetary system of Bhumandala resembles a lotus flower, and the 7 islands resemble the row of the flower. This exemplifies how this structure is not just mind-boggling, but also quite beautiful. At the center of Bhumandala lies the island of Jambudvip, of which Bharatavarsha, the place where we live, is part. This island is circular, with a width of 100,000 yojanas. To be able to understand this model, we need to first forget about the model offered by modern astronomy and concentrate solely on the features of Bhumandala as described in the Srimad Bhagavatam. We will try to harmonize this model with what we see when we look at the sky in the subsequent parts of this series. But for this, it is important to first understand the model of the universe given the Vedas. Jambudvipa is subdivided into 9 separate portions of land, each one with a length of 9,000 yojanas. These tracts of land are inhabited by different races of intelligent beings and are separated by very tall mountains. At the center, there is Ilavrita Varsa, which contains the Sumeru mountain, which is made from solid gold. This mountain looks like an inverted golden cone that is very similar in form to the pericarp of a lotus flower. The presence of this mountain is a feature that makes Bhumandala look very much like a lotus flower. Another significance of this golden mountain is that it makes Jambudvipa look like an arena of a fire sacrifice. This reminds the inhabitants that this is a place for performing yagas with the purpose of ascending into higher realms, instead of just spending our time in useless sense gratification. This mountain is extraordinarily tall. It is mentioned that the height of the mountain is also 100,000 yojanas, the same measurement as the width of Jambudvipa. Of these, 16,000 yojanas are buried inside the ground, and thus the total height of the visible part of the mountain is 84,000 yojanas. A normal mountain has a large base and a narrow peak, but Sumeru is inverted, and thus it is narrow at the base and wide at the peak. The width of the mountain at the top is 32,000 yojanas, and this space is occupied by 9 towns dedicated to Lord Brahma and the 8 principal demigods. Although all these demigods have their own planets, they also preside over these cities. Sometimes it is described that these cities at the top of Mount Sumeru are like summer villas for these demigods. On the 4 sides of Sumeru are 4 smaller mountains called Mandara, Meru Mandala, Suparsva, and Kumuda, that are like its belts. These mountains are 10,000 yojanas in length. At the top of these 4 mountains, there are 4 gigantic trees positioned like flagstaffs. These trees have a height of 1,100 yojanas, and their branches spread over the same length. Other verses of the 16th chapter of the 50th canto describe other geographical features of the islands of Jambudvipa, including lakes and other mountains. All these features are absolutely gigantic compared with the geographical features of our planet. Just to compare, the Earth of our sensory experience has a diameter of 7,926 miles, or 991 yojanas, which is less than the size of one of the 4 trees positioned at the top of the above-mentioned mountains. Similarly, the Himalayas we can experience with our earthly senses have a height of just 5.5 miles, which is nothing compared with the 672,000 miles of the visible parts of the Sumeru mountain. It's also important to note that Srimad Bhagavatam 5.16.9 mentions that the Himalayas are 10,000 yojanas tall. Obviously, the sages who transmitted this knowledge were intelligent enough to understand the difference between a mountain that is 5.5 miles tall and 10,000 miles tall. This hints at the idea that different features of the Vedic universe may be perceived differently by beings with different sets of senses and in different stages of spiritual evolution. This is something we will examine more carefully in the subsequent parts of this series. Surrounding Jambudvipa is a great ocean of salty water that also extends for 100,000 yojanas, the same length as the island itself. If we could see this structure, the view would be breathtaking. Sadaputta Prabhu made at his time a 3D rendering of Jambudvipa with accurate proportions that give us an idea. Can you see the minuscule trees on top of the mountains that surround Mount Meru? Each of these trees is bigger than our planet. This gives an idea of how gigantic this structure is. The river Ganges flows from the celestial planets to the top of Sumeru mountain, where it divides into 4 branches that flow in the 4 directions, bathing different portions of Jambudvipa, and ultimately flows into the South Ocean. The Ganges we see on our planet is a feature of the Alakananda branch that flows through Brahmalaya and reaches Bharatavarsa after passing through many mountains. We live in Bharatavarsa, which is the field of activities where souls take birth to create a new set of karma that they will enjoy or suffer in their subsequent lives. Inhabitants of Bharatavarsa are supposed to worship the Lord by following the Varnashrama system. The other Varsas that are part of Jambudvipa are celestial places, inhabited by souls who are enjoying the results of their past karma. A different incarnation of Lord Vishnu presides over each of these Varsas and is worshipped by the inhabitants. You can find the complete description in the 18th chapter of the 50th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. Jambudvipa and its South Ocean are surrounded by a series of concentric islands called Plaksadvipa, Saumalidvipa, Kusadvipa, Kraunchadvipa, Sakadvipa, and Puskaradvipa. Each of these islands has its own ocean, and each is 2 times wider than the previous. In this way, the distances increase exponentially, culminating with the 51,200,000 miles of Puskaradvipa. Beyond it, there is a huge concentric mountain called Lokaloka, which marks the boundary of the portion of the universe that is illuminated by the sun. After the Lokaloka mountain, there is a Lokavarsha, a dark tract of land where the rays of the sun are not visible. On top of Lokaloka mountain, there are 4 huge elephants called Gajapatis that balance it, preventing it from tilting on any direction. The total distance from Mount Sumeru to the Lokaloka mountain is 125 million yojanas, or 1 billion miles, and a Lokavarsa extends for the same distance. The universe thus has a radius of 250 million yojanas, from Mount Sumeru to Lokaloka mountain, and the total diameter of the universe is calculated as 500 million yojanas, or 4 billion miles. Bhumandala is thus a gigantic flat structure that is fixed in place. According to Vedic Cosmology, the Sun goes around Mount Sumeru in a circular orbit. It's described that the Sun God sits in a chariot that has only one wheel. One side of the axle is fixed at the top of Mount Sumeru, and the side with the wheel goes on Manasatara mountain, situated on the middle of Puskaradvipa. Vertically, the Sun is situated close to the plane of Bhumandala, and horizontally it is situated close to Sumeru mountain. It circles around Bhumandala once a year, and as a result, the inhabitants of Bhumandala receive less sunlight during part of the year. When the Sun is on the north, the inhabitants of the south receive less light, and when the Sun is in the south, the inhabitants of the north receive less light. Here you can see a diagram that gives the idea of the orbit of the Sun around Bhumandala. This may at first appear like a very simplistic description that doesn't explain the movements of the Sun as we observe on our planet, including the passage of the days and nights and the seasons of the year. It happens that the orbit of the Sun in the Vedic model is much more complex than it may appear at first glance. We will discuss this in more detail in the following parts of this series. Apart from the orbit of the Sun, Srimad Bhagavatam also describes the orbits of the planets of our solar system. All the planets circle around its orbits higher than the plane of Bhumandala. Different from Bhumandala, which is a flat structure, all the planets are globes that float in space, much like believed in modern astronomy. According to the description, however, the Moon is much bigger and more distant, being 800,000 miles above the Sun over the plane of Bhumandala. Considering that the axis of the Sun is supported by Mount Sumeru, which has an elevation of 84,000 yojanas, or 672,000 miles above the plane of Bhumandala, we can calculate that the moon described in the Srimad Bhagavatam is much more distant than the gross moon studied in modern astronomy. We will also discuss more on these points in the subsequent parts of this series. Apart from this horizontal description of the universe, which describes Jambudvipa and the other islands that form Bhumandala, there is also a vertical description of the universe that describes the other planetary systems. These planetary systems are described as being like disks, positioned one on top of the other. Very close to our plane, starting from the area of the upper atmosphere, there is the plane of Bhuvarloka, inhabited by subtle beings who are followers of Kuvera. The realm spreads around Mount Sumeru. It's described in the Mahabharata that the Pandavas visited this realm while traveling through the Himalayas, being able to access Mount Sumeru through paths that are inaccessible to us. Higher than Bhuvarloka is Swargaloka, the abode of the demigods. Swargaloka is situated higher than the top of Sumeru mountain. Demons frequently go there to battle the demigods, and sometimes they win, temporarily gaining control over the celestial plane. 10 million yojanas higher than Swargaloka is Maharloka, and 20 million yojanas higher than Maharloka is Janaloka. These are the abodes of great sages who dedicate their lives to worshipping Lord Vishnu and cultivating spiritual knowledge. These are high elevated beings who live for extraordinarily long lifespans and are unaffected by the disputes between the demons and the demigods. 80 million yojanas above Janaloka is Tapaloka, the abode of great ascetics who perform solitary meditation on the Super Soul. This is the planet where the four Kumaras live. 120 million yojanas above Tapaloka is Brahmaloka, the abode of Lord Brahma, and the most elevated planetary system of our universe. Only extraordinarily elevated souls can take birth there. We can find the detailed descriptions of life in these different planetary systems in the Brihad Bhagavatamrita, a book that describes the travelings of Gopakumara through the higher planetary systems and his experience in these different planes. Although it may sound like a work of fiction at first, the Brihad Bhagavatamrita narrates a true story that happened long ago in a different universe, a story that Sanatana Goswami could capture in his meditation and write in the pages of his book. Just like there are planetary systems above our plane, there are also the lower planetary systems. These are subterraneous realms that are situated lower than the plane of Bhumandala. These are the abodes of the Asuras, consisting of the planes of Atala, Vitala, Sutala, Talatala, Mahatala, Rasatala, and Patala. Lower than Patala are the hellish planets, the abode of Yamaraj, and still lower is Anantashesha, who sustains the whole universe on the top of his hoods. At first, this description may seem very bizarre, since it's completely different from what we can see using our senses or any type of instrument we have at our disposal. It is very easy to attest that the earth is not flat, one just needs to take a plane and go around it. And it's easy to see that we don't have a gigantic island with a golden inverted cone 672,000 miles high after the North Pole. Srila Prabhupada was quick to point out that since the explanation is given in the Srimad Bhagavatam, it must be correct. The Shastras are not the fruit of mundane experimentation, but a knowledge that is received from higher sources, going all the way to God Himself. Since God is perfect, the knowledge of the Vedas must also be perfect, and this includes not only the metaphysical knowledge about the soul, but also the cosmological model of the universe given in the Srimad Bhagavatam. If the description given in the Puranas sounds too far out, it's just because there is a deficiency in our perception or the methods we are using to try to understand it. However, Srila Prabhupada didn't try to explain all the details of this model himself. Instead, he left the mission to explain it and depict it in the Vedic planetarium to his disciples and grand-disciples, as he wrote in a letter to Swarupa Damodar, 27 April 1976. Quote, "So now, all you PhDs must carefully study the details of the 50th canto and make a working model of the universe. If we can explain the passing seasons, eclipses, phases of the moon, passing of day and nights, etc., then it will be very powerful propaganda." Unquote. At the time, they looked for Indian astronomers and astrologers who could explain it, but they were perplexed by it as the devotees themselves. They even brought a Pandit to see Prabhupada, but he quickly had to admit that he could not explain it. The first to try to explain it in a scientific way was Sadaputta Prabhu, followed by Dhutakarma Prabhu and others. By studying their works, I started to understand that the cryptic description of the universe in the Srimad Bhagavatam is quite fascinating and holds the key to a higher level of understanding. There is a lot more information there than it appears on the surface. Stay tuned, this is just the first part of the series. We will explore the Vedic universe and how it relates to the universe we see when we look to the sky in the next episodes. See you there.